For years, the world believed it knew exactly who Robin Williams was. A man of endless jokes, unstoppable energy, and laughter that filled every room he entered. But Sally Field saw something different. While working beside him on one of the most beloved family films ever made, she witnessed moments that never reached the screen. Moments of silence, instinct, and deep emotional awareness. What she later revealed was not about comedy, but about humanity, grief, and a kindness that quietly shaped her life forever. When two worlds met on one set, when Sally Field agreed to join the cast of Mrs. Doubtfire, she was already an established and highly respected actress. By that point in her career, she had proven herself across decades of film and television. Known for her emotional discipline, professionalism, and ability to carry complex roles without exaggeration, she approached the project with a clear understanding of what it required, a grounded performance in a story that blended humor with the painful realities of divorce, custody, and fractured families. Robin Williams, on the other hand, arrived on set carrying a very different kind of reputation. He was widely seen as unpredictable, fast-moving, and overwhelmingly energetic. His comedic mind worked at a speed few could match. To many actors, working opposite him was intimidating. He was known for improvising endlessly, reshaping scenes in real time, and pushing beyond the script in ways that could either elevate a moment or completely derail it. From the beginning, the contrast between them was obvious. Field was methodical, emotionally precise, and focused on internal truth. Williams was explosive, spontaneous, and constantly searching for new angles. Yet instead of clashing, these differences created a strange balance. Field later reflected that working with him felt like standing inside a moving storm, unpredictable, powerful, but strangely controlled by an internal compass she would only come to understand later. Robin had a clear structure to his work that many people never noticed. He did not arrive on set simply to improvise endlessly. According to Field and others present, he would first deliver several takes exactly as written. He respected the script, the director, and the rhythm of the story. Only after those takes were completed would he begin to explore. That was when the unexpected voices, altered lines, and emotional shifts would emerge. Nothing was random. It was exploration rooted in discipline. This method forced Field to stay fully present in every scene. She could not rely on memorized timing or predictable beats. Each take demanded genuine reaction. Over time, this sharpened her performance rather than distracting from it. Instead of competing with Williams' energy, she anchored it. Where he expanded outward, she held steady. That contrast became the emotional backbone of their on-screen relationship. Behind the scenes, director Chris Columbus quickly recognized that what was happening between them was rare. Scenes felt alive in ways that could not be planned. To preserve that energy, filming strategies were adjusted. The production adapted not to chaos, but to possibility. What mattered was capturing truth as it happened. The day the laughter stopped. Halfway through production, the atmosphere on set changed in a way no one could have planned for. They were preparing to film the courtroom sequence, one of the most emotionally charged moments in the story. It was the scene where Miranda Hillard stands before a judge explaining why she believes her children should not remain in Daniel's care. For Sally Field, the scene already demanded restraint, control, and emotional precision. But that morning, something far heavier entered her life. Field was sitting in her camper outside the mock courtroom when she received a phone call from a doctor. Her father, who had suffered a serious stroke years earlier and was living in a nursing facility, had just passed away after another massive stroke. The doctor asked if she wanted resuscitation measures taken. Field, already overwhelmed, answered immediately. She said no. Her father had been clear about his wishes. She asked the doctor to lean down and tell him goodbye for her. She later described herself as beside myself, but she did not break down. Like so many actors trained to work through pain, her instinct was to continue. She intended to step onto the set and act. She was not crying. She was holding everything inside. To the crew, she appeared composed, committed to the schedule. She was still available. But Robin Williams noticed something was wrong. He did not approach her loudly or theatrically. He did not joke. He simply watched her closely and felt the shift. Without explanation, he walked over, gently pulled her aside, and asked if she was okay. At first, she deflected. Then, she told him the truth. Her father had just died. Williams reacted instantly. There was no hesitation, no discussion about time or logistics. He told her she needed to leave right away. He went directly to director Chris Columbus and insisted that filming be rearranged. Scenes involving Field were delayed or shot around her for the rest of the day. The priority was no longer the movie. It was her. A quiet bond forged in grief. After that day, something fundamental shifted between Sally Field and Robin Williams. They had already respected each other as actors, but now there was a deeper layer of trust, one that did not need to be spoken aloud. Field returned to set carrying fresh grief, still processing the loss of her father while stepping back into a story that required emotional restraint. What she noticed immediately was that Williams did not overwhelm her with attention or sympathy. He did something far more rare. He adjusted. Robin did not push jokes in her direction. He did not force conversation. He stayed aware of her emotional space, reading when she was ready to engage and when she needed distance. When humor came, it came gently. When silence was needed, he honored it. Field would later describe this as one of the most compassionate forms of support she had ever experienced in her career. He did not make her pain public. He made it safe. Their scenes together began to carry a different weight. The arguments between Daniel and Miranda felt less performative and more lived in. The frustration, the sadness, the quiet resignation beneath their words came through with unusual clarity. This was not accidental. Field has explained that Williams' ability to listen, truly listen, made her feel emotionally anchored during scenes that could easily have tipped into melodrama. Williams continued his disciplined approach to performance. He still delivered scripted takes. He still explored through improvisation. But now, Field noticed something else. His improvisations were no longer just comedic bursts. Many were emotional adjustments, pauses, softened tones, moments of restraint that gave scenes room to breathe. He was responding not only to the script, but to her emotional reality. Director Chris Columbus later acknowledged that the film's emotional balance depended heavily on this dynamic. The story could have collapsed into broad comedy or turned bitter and heavy. Instead, it walked a narrow line between laughter and loss. That balance existed because Field and Williams trusted one another enough to stay honest even when the material became uncomfortable. Off-camera, their connection remained understated. They did not socialize excessively. There were no dramatic displays of closeness, but Field has said she felt Williams's presence constantly, watchful, supportive, aware. He was someone who noticed when people were struggling and intervened quietly without making himself the center of the moment. This experience changed how Field viewed him forever. Before, she had admired his intelligence and talent. After, she understood his emotional depth. She saw that the same mind capable of creating chaos and laughter was also capable of immense sensitivity and restraint. Williams was not fueled by noise. He was guided by instinct. The side of Robin most people never saw. After Mrs. Doubtfire wrapped, life moved forward for both of them, but the connection did not disappear. Sally Field and Robin Williams did not become constant companions or public fixtures together. Their bond existed in a quieter space built on shared experience rather than proximity. Over the years, when Field was asked about working with Williams, her answers never focused on jokes or chaos. She always returned to one word: presence. Field has consistently described Williams as one of the most emotionally intelligent people she ever worked with. He was not simply reacting to lines or blocking. He was reacting to people. On set, he paid attention to the emotional temperature of a room. He noticed who was anxious, who was tired, who was struggling, and when he intervened, he did so without performance. There was no audience for his kindness. This stood in contrast to how the public largely understood him. To audiences, Williams was speed, volume, and excess. He was a torrent of voices and characters. But Field saw that this external energy masked something far more delicate. Beneath the improvisation was a man constantly scanning for emotional signals, adjusting himself to protect others from discomfort or pain. As the years passed, Field became increasingly aware that this side of Williams was disappearing from the public narrative. Interviews focused on his brilliance, his chaos, his rapid-fire humor. Rarely did anyone ask about the cost of that generosity or the emotional labor required to constantly lift others. Field did not correct this image publicly at first. She held those memories privately. When Williams died, The shock was global. For Field, it was deeply personal. She did not immediately speak in detail. When she did, her words carried weight because they were restrained. She described him not as broken, but as brave, not as unstable, but as deeply feeling. She emphasized that his kindness was not accidental. It was intentional, instinctive, and constant. The kindness that hid a quiet collapse. In the years leading up to his death, Robin Williams was living in a state of growing confusion and fear that very few people fully understood at the time. From the outside, it appeared as if he was simply struggling with depression again, something he had spoken about publicly in the past. But those closest to him sensed that something else was happening, something more severe, more destabilizing, and harder to explain. Professionally, his momentum had slowed. A television project he had hoped would mark a strong return failed to gain traction and was cancelled after a single season. For a performer who had spent decades relying on instinct, speed, and mental sharpness, this felt like a door quietly closing. At the same time, he was navigating personal transitions, including the emotional aftermath of divorce and the effort to settle into a new marriage. These changes alone would have been heavy. Combined, they became overwhelming. Then came a diagnosis that frightened him deeply. He was told he had Parkinson's disease. The possibility of losing control over his movement, speech, and memory struck at the core of his identity. Robin Williams' life and career were built on timing, agility, and mental clarity. The thought of those abilities slipping away filled him with anxiety. His friends later recalled him becoming more withdrawn, more uncertain, and increasingly afraid of his own mind. What no one knew at the time was that this diagnosis was incomplete. After his death, an autopsy revealed that Williams had been suffering from Lewy body dementia, a severe and aggressive neurological disorder. The disease causes unpredictable cognitive decline, intense anxiety, confusion, hallucinations, and sudden changes in mood and behavior. It is often misdiagnosed because symptoms overlap with other conditions and it progresses rapidly. For someone like Williams, the experience was devastating. He was losing access to the very instincts that had guided him his entire life. The man who could read a room, who could sense emotional shifts in others with extraordinary accuracy, was suddenly unable to trust his own perceptions. Friends described him as frightened by his own thoughts, aware that something was wrong, but unable to name it. Sally Field has never claimed to have known what he was going through in those final years. What she has said is more restrained and more honest. She has expressed sorrow not just for the loss itself, but for the fact that he did not get to grow old alongside his peers. She has spoken about how deeply unfair it feels that someone so generous, so attuned to the pain of others, was left to navigate such confusion largely in silence. The memory she chose to carry for him years after Mrs. Doubtfire had become a permanent part of popular culture, Sally Field stood on a red carpet preparing to receive one of the highest honors of her career.